morning, and thank you so much for joining us on the Weather Channel. 10 minutes before the hour, you've tuned in just in time for Storm Watch. We've been watching, of course, our very slow-moving surface cold front across the Mississippi Valley, and it will be a slow mover even today, so expect much of the same if you saw showers and thunderstorms yesterday, because that system isn't moving much at all. We'll show that to you in just a minute. Right now, though, let's give you the very latest. Of course, a part of Storm Watch is the tropical update. So we'll begin this edition of Storm Watch with a tropical update, and we'll show you what we have. The latest now from Dr. William Gray. He's just put out the forecast as of this morning. Now, this is the updated version of his projected hurricane season. Well, anyway, 98. He is expecting 10 named storms to develop across the Atlantic basin, 6 of which will perhaps become hurricanes, and 2 of those hurricanes will become strong hurricanes, or will be categorized as a strong or major hurricane, a category 3 or stronger, and that means winds of 111 miles an hour or stronger. So we will keep you updated as we go through the rest of this hurricane season, but this is the updated version of Dr. William Gray's projection. As we look at our satellite picture, we have pretty much no tropical cyclonic formation this morning. We've been waking up to fair conditions across the waters here. The Great Atlantic Basin, you can see the calm conditions. We have been watching this flare up here just south of Hispaniola, a lot of deep convection and thunderstorm activity with it. An upper level low here in the Gulf of Mexico and off the coast of the Carolinas. It's a cold core low pressure system, so it's not warm core, and that's what we look for when we talk about tropical development. So we don't really have to worry about anything developing as far as a tropical system goes in the central Gulf or here off the coast of the Carolinas. We have been watching some thunderstorm activity, though, the Outer Banks of North and South Carolina, and here some scattered thunderstorms over the Gulf Coast. But again, nothing organized as far as a tropical system. A little different vantage point here shows the southeast coast and the western Atlantic, but again, nothing organized and nothing too threatening as we have seen across this area the last 24 hours. Now, notice how this is really flaring up, a lot of deep convection, but we've had no low-level circulation with this system, so that indicates no real organization in terms of tropical development. But we have had some very heavy rain and deep convection associated with this flare-up. We'll continue to watch this area, the Eastern Caribbean. Of course, this is Puerto Rico, Jamaica, Hispaniola here, and the islands that make up the Lesser Antilles. Notice all the fair conditions here, how tranquil and calm the waters are, so no problems. As you look farther east across the Atlantic basin, all we see are blue waters, so really not to worry here. Let's keep going a little farther east, because this is a time of year that we start to look far across the Atlantic basin toward the West African coast for any impressive waves coming off of the coast, because it all starts here now in Africa, and as all those waves come off the coast, we'll have to continue to follow them as they propagate across the Atlantic basin. And if they look pretty impressive and hold together pretty good, then we will become very concerned for the potential for tropical development as they move again across the Atlantic basin. But we haven't seen anything too impressive come off the West African coast the last 12 to 24 hours. Just a weak wave here with some thunderstorm activity, but again, nothing too threatening coming off the West African coast. As you can look, our tropical storms and hurricanes, points of origin. Now, the beginning of August to the 10th of the month, you can see how we start to focus a little bit more across the eastern Atlantic basin, because each of these dots indicates where we've had organization or tropical storms or hurricanes to develop over the last 110 years. We've had about 49 storms, so that's not to say that it is likely that storms will develop this time of year, but just based on climatology the last 110 years, these are the areas that we've had most of the activity as far as the tropics go. So needless to say, we will have to continue to watch the
morning. It's time now for Storm Watch. And this morning we've been watching very closely the potential for some flooding across the Midwest. And in fact, there has been some flooding around Ann Arbor and Detroit this morning. And we've had some big time flooding too just south and west of San Antonio. And we'll say more about that coming up in just a moment. But right now it's time for your tropical update. And we start things off by looking at the hurricane season. Now, Dr. William Gray is a noted hurricane expert from Colorado State University, and he has recently come up with a new forecast. He is now thinking that we'll probably have 10 named storms, 6 of which will likely become hurricanes, and 2 of those could become major hurricanes. Now, based on that, it looks as if this hurricane season could be far more active than last season. And the reason for that is because we have moved from this El Nino weather pattern to a La Nina weather pattern, meaning that we have cooler than usual water temperatures across the equatorial Pacific. And usually when that does happen, it does favor a far more active Atlantic hurricane season. Now, whether or not that actually pans out or not, we'll still have to wait and see. But at any rate, this is the official forecast now for the 1998 season. Now, as we check out what's currently happening throughout the tropical regions, we have several areas of disturbed weather, several suspect areas, and one of those happens to be the Gulf of Mexico. We've been seeing some type of circulation kind of spinning around the Gulf of Mexico at this time. There has been some convection in association with it, some showers and some thunderstorms, so it may be rather squally for some mariners today with these showers and thunderstorms persisting. Now, as far as any development is concerned, if there is some type of development, it's going to be very, very slow to come by across this area. At the same time, though, we're also watching a low-pressure system just off the southeastern shoreline. It continues to swirl and churn, a very stubborn low that has moved very little over the last couple of days or so. At any rate, though, it will continue to generate some scattered showers and thunderstorms today for the Outer Banks of North Carolina and then running southward on into central and southern Florida. Now, with this particular system, it's a cold core low pressure area, so presently it's not showing any tropical organization or any tropical characteristics, but nonetheless we'll watch it closely anyway. Again, this is a cold core low pressure area that's helping to enhance the rainfall across the southeastern shoreline. At the same time, too, we're still watching a tropical wave that continues to slowly drift its way across the Caribbean. This morning, quite a bit of convection. We've had some very squally and intense showers and thunderstorms along the southern coastline of Hispaniola and back over the open waters. We'll watch this area too for the potential for some development. Now, at least at the time being, upper level winds are not that terribly unfavorable. So there is a chance that this might develop into something. So again, it certainly is an area that does bear some watching. Farther out across the equatorial regions, though, heading out towards the Atlantic, well, right now, kind of quiet. Just a series of clouds and showers and thunderstorms lined up across the intertropical convergence zone, but nothing is very well organized and nothing is looking too threatening at the time being. Now, generally speaking, though, as we look through the last 110 years or so, since 1886, the first week or so in August, well, there hasn't been a whole lot of activity, but there have been 49 named storms during this time span, and we've seen most of those generally forming from the Gulf, the southeastern shoreline, and back over towards the Atlantic basin. These are the favorite areas for tropical development, at least for the early part of August. Now, as we switch over, we head over towards the eastern Pacific, and we're still tracking very closely Tropical Depression Estelle. Estelle is still more or less holding its own, and it may, for a time being, kind of briefly head up towards tropical storm strength, but for the most part, it really hasn't changed a whole lot in strength or intensity in the last several hours or so. Right now, still packing winds of 35 miles per hour, and it's generally pulling off towards the west. Still fairly well organized, though, at this particular point, and the biggest impact that Estelle is having is that it continues to generate some bigger than usual seas and some higher than usual swells. And some of those swells are being felt as far away as southern sections of California. So if you're thinking about heading to the beaches today, Huntington Beach, Redondo Beach, you'll have to watch out for some choppy waters and some bigger swells across the area. For Hawaii, well, we have a little trough of low pressure across the region there. Nothing of great concern, though, for that area. And elsewhere, as we head a little bit farther off towards the east, we still have a disturbed region, too, off the coast of Mexico, and we'll watch that, too, for the potential for some development. Meanwhile, the remnants of Otto still working across China, and we'll likely see some heavy rains and some flooding over parts of China. More flooding, though, continues at this time, especially for Texas around Frio County. Some soaking rains there, and more heavy rain and strong thunderstorms will be a good likelihood through the afternoon. Stay tuned. We'll update the potential for severe weather and much more coming up next on Weather Center.
Heavy downpours could mean dangerous driving in the Midwest. Find out where thunderstorms and flooding are likely. Watch Weather Center after your local forecast.
Well, during the storm watch, we want to check out Wisconsin, where we've had some very heavy rain, especially right now around Milwaukee, and we have a number of flood warnings to tell you about. But before we get to that, it is time for our tropical update, and John Hope is standing by.
And thanks, Jill. We're going to start in with Dr. Bill Gray's updated seasonal forecast that he just issued here in August. He had originally had one in June and updated it in August, and it's exactly the same as it was. He's forecasting a total of 10 named storms out there in the Atlantic, 6 of which will be hurricanes, 2 major hurricanes. That's with winds exceeding 110 miles an hour. And now that doesn't mean we want you to understand that you're going to have that many landfalls in the United States. It doesn't address that at all, as a matter of fact. Any part of these or all of these could all be at sea. Now, so far we've had 1, so that means we need to get 9 more between now and the end of the hurricane season. And if we get 9 from now on, we would actually be getting a little bit above normal. But you see the total forecast is very close to normal. It's just 1 above on the tropical storms, and it's average on the hurricanes and the major storms. So once again, that's the total number of storms in the Atlantic Basin. It doesn't have anything to do with the likelihood of landfall. Now, we don't have an awful lot to be worried about today. I guess the main concern is here in the Gulf of Mexico, where we have an old front, and along that old front we've had quite a few thunderstorms flare up, and we also have evidence of a low pressure system, a kind of a broad elongated low here in the Gulf. There's some possibility that after a day or so, because the Gulf water is very warm, it's about 85 degrees, the surface of the water, about 85 degrees Fahrenheit out in the Gulf, so we need to watch that some, but nothing to be concerned about right away. The pressures are falling a little bit, but they're still not very low. And you can see that over Florida along that old frontal boundary we have some very heavy rains, especially in the southern part of the state. The only other area we have that we're watching a little bit of, we're not really concerned either, is down here in the Caribbean. This is the island Hispaniola. The area is Dominican Republic and Haiti, and this doesn't look quite as well organized as it did yesterday. It's a tropical wave. It's moving on to the west, and apart from that, you see a lot of thunderstorms that develop just during the heat of the day over Puerto Rico here and over Jamaica too, and a whole lot of thunderstorms, as you can see, over the big island there of Cuba. Now, as we get farther out in the Atlantic, well, first of all, I want to mention we still have an upper low here just east of Savannah, and we have some thunderstorms feeding up into that and some persistent showers along the coast of North Carolina, but no kind of organization there. And one thing we notice as we look out in the Atlantic then, these are the islands here. There's the island of Guadalupe. For thousands of miles there we have nothing but clear skies, and these showers we see down here, this is along the intertropical convergence zone, but you can see it as far to the south, and that's because we have pretty high pressure out here in the East Atlantic, and we see them a little bit farther north now as we get off the African coast, but still not anything there that we're looking at today that seems likely to organize anytime soon. These are the storms that have originated. The dots show where each storm originated between the 1st and the 10th of August over 110 years. There have been 49 of them, and that averages out a little bit less, say, than 1 every 2 years. Now in the Pacific, we have a brand new depression. That is centered, forget that 1,660 miles, it's about 365 miles. We're going to correct that as soon as we can. To the south-southwest of Cabo San Lucas, the winds are 30 miles an hour, moving towards the northwest at 12. And it's expected to move northwest, come pretty close to Baja, California, but get over cooler water quite soon, so we're not right now forecasting it to be a tropical storm. Now down here off Baja, there you see the clouds associated with this new depression. Right about in there is where the center of the depression is. Out in the West Pacific, we still have Estelle, there it is right out there, and there's a new depression. And here are the particulars on Estelle. It's centered at 20.6, 141.
Numbers here are very close to the average, what we would expect in a typical year. So that lends us to believe that we are still perhaps in for some action this season, even though we have so far only seen one named tropical storm in the Atlantic. Now, the thing to reiterate here, you look at that number 10 and you say, my goodness, 10 named storms, 6 of which are hurricanes, and 2 of which of those may become major hurricanes. What this doesn't tell you is anything about how close to a landmass these storms or hurricanes might come. So again, this is not a prediction on landfalling tropical storms or hurricanes. It just gives you an idea of what kind of activity we think might be out there as we go through the remainder of the season. Now, June, we start the season June 1st, we go through July. It's typically in August that we see a rapid rise or a rapid increase in activity in the tropics. And then as we head into early September, specifically around September 10th, that is when we see the peak of the hurricane season. So even though things have been relatively quiet, things could get very, very active in a hurry. And that's why it's important to tune in 10 minutes before the top of every hour and get the very, very latest. There are 3 different areas that we're watching with interest in the Atlantic Basin. The first one is here in and around the Gulf of Mexico, and there is an area of low level pressure, an area of pressure at the surface, low pressure. It is not a very strong area of low pressure. In fact, it's relatively weak. And you're seeing every once in a while a little bit of convection or some thunderstorms developing, but what we need is for this to persist and for it to happen around the center of circulation of that weak area of low pressure. Then we would start to get a little more interested and say, hey, this is something we need to watch. Right now, because of the close proximity to the U.S., we're going to keep an eye on it. As long as there's an area of low pressure and some convection firing up, it's something we need to watch very, very closely. But at this point in time, not seeing a whole lot in the form of development. Another area of low pressure off the Carolina coast here. Again, the reason to keep an eye out for this is simply that it's located over the warmer Gulf Stream waters. And as long as you have that situation, there's always the potential for some sort of development down the road. But in both those scenarios, we're not expecting any rapid development. It's just something we need to keep an eye on. We've had quite a bit of convection or thunderstorm activity with this too. See it firing on up. Right now this is encountering some westerly shear, but if this little wave holds together as it moves westward, eventually it will be in a more favorable area, and that will be something that needs to be watched. And then finally a little twist of some clouds moving up toward the Bahamas, and we're kind of watching that particular region too. You can see some of this. Again, nothing that's showing any real signs of development at this point in time. So a few areas to watch, but the moral of the story is there's not a whole lot happening now, but a few areas that might see development down the road. Any development that does happen will be slow to happen, so just keep tuning back in and we'll let you know if anything is happening here in the Atlantic Basin. Now we have an area of high pressure that is dominating much of the Atlantic, and it's actually suppressing a lot of the convection from the intertropical convergence zone further southward. So we've had just a beautiful day across some of the islands, and as long as all that action is getting suppressed to the south, even these waves coming off of Africa don't stand much of a chance of holding together. There's a peek at some of the climatology, and notice as we head through the first 10 days in August, it does typically tend to get a little bit more active, so we'll have to continue to watch things very closely. We have a brand new tropical depression in the eastern Pacific. I'm talking about TD7E. There are the latest coordinates here. Moving to the northwest at 10 miles per hour, the estimated central pressure at 1,006 millibars, and this will be something we'll be keeping a very close eye on over the course of the next few days. There it is from a satellite perspective. This is what's left of Estelle, tropical depression Estelle, still going out there. Winds of 35 miles per hour. Eventually this may play a little bit of a role in the weather in Hawaii, but again it is expected to continue to weaken as it goes on westward. There it's what it looks like from a satellite perspective. Let's try and take you back to the lower 48. I talked about the flooding rains that are occurring right now heading into the southern Great Lakes region. We'll continue to watch this area very closely because the associated area of low pressure just is not moving. So more significant moisture can be expected as we head into the lower lakes region, and we're still seeing some rain across the same areas that have seen it for the past several days. We'll keep an eye out for all this and talk more about it next with Weather Center.
Heavy rain soaks areas from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast, and thunderstorms are possible in some places. Details next on Weather Center after your local forecast.
There are two kinds of drivers in this world. Those who've had a flat tire and those who will. That's why there's Fix-A-Flat. The name says it all.
You've got a house.
Good Friday morning, and thank you so much for joining us on the Weather Channel. You've tuned in 10 minutes before the hour, just in time for Storm Watch. Of course, a part of our Storm Watch segment, we always have the tropical update during tropical season. Now, this is August, and you know, throughout the month of August, we start to get closer and closer to the peak of hurricane season, which is the middle of September, by the way. So the month of August, we really start to focus all across the Atlantic basin for the potential for tropical systems developing all the way to the West African coast here, areas that are perhaps more conducive for tropical development. Now, that's not necessarily to say that today things are conducive or favorable for tropical development, but these areas we, of course, are concerned with as we go through the month of August. That's because over the last 110 years or so, we've had about 49 storms to develop across the Atlantic basin, and each of these dots indicates where the storms developed. So that gives you an idea of the areas that we will have to watch, of course, during the beginning of August. Now, 49 storms, 110 years, that's not many storms, but again, just the overall view, there's a chance for tropical development across these regions throughout the month of August. Now, as we look at things right now, it's fairly quiet. We have nothing organized to say that a threatening tropical system will develop, but there have been areas that we've been watching. The low pressure that's swirling here. It was off the southeast coast. Now it has started to move inland. Not a tropical system. A weak area of low pressure in the Gulf of Mexico. This is not a tropical system either. It's pretty quiet over the Caribbean. We have no tropical systems developing. And you can see a little flare up along the intertropical convergence zone. But even here, we don't have anything organized or too threatening this morning. So let's zoom in on all the different areas. Again, an upper level low. Barometric pressure about 10,014 millibars, so that's not too low of a pressure. Don't have to worry about tropical development here. And off the southeast coast now, again, we've had that low pressure to move inland over the last 24 hours, and we've had showers and storms coming inland here from the coastal plains of the Carolinas.